I'm Val. I was a teacher for 7 years, and I've helped thousands of teachers pass their certification exams at 240. And today, I'm going to help you. This video is going to prepare you for the TExES Science of Teaching Reading test. That's test code 293. We'll call it the STR for short. This video is going to cover three things: what's on the test and how to study for it, the most likely concepts you'll see on the test, and we're going to look at a few practice questions to nail it down at the end. Now, the STR consists of 4 domains: reading pedagogy, reading development foundational skills, reading development comprehension, and analysis and response. Each domain has competencies with descriptive statements listed under it. The STR includes 90 selected response questions, which come from the first 3 domains, and 1 constructed response question, which comes from the last domain. A constructed response is like an essay, and we'll call it a CRQ, constructed response question for short. I know having to write an essay as part of the exam may seem nerve-wracking, but I have some good news for you. All of the content you need to know for your CRQ is covered in the first 3 domains. So by the time you get to the CRQ, you'll just need to apply that knowledge into a clear, coherent essay. Does that sound easier said than done? Don't worry, we have you covered. We have everything you need to prepare in our 240 study guide. The link is below, and we're going to give you a sneak peek now in this video. You're probably most unsure about that CRQ, so let's just tackle it first and get it out of the way. It's in Domain 4, Analysis and Response. The CRQ is worth 20% of your exam score, and we recommend you spend 1 hour on it. It is a case study focused on one student who has one weakness in each of these 2 areas: foundational reading skills, which includes things like phonemic awareness, phonics, and fluency, and reading comprehension, which includes issues like vocabulary knowledge or application of literal, inferential, or evaluative comprehension skills. How will you figure out what their weaknesses are? The prompt will give you information about the student in the form of exhibits. They'll include a word reading assessment, a passage reading assessment, including the video of the child reading as well as the actual text, fluency data, which includes letter name, phonemic segmentation, and nonsense word fluency, and a comprehension assessment. Your job is to study the first 3 exhibits to find the one foundational weakness that is evident across all of them. Then study the comprehension assessment alone to determine the comprehension weakness. Here are the official directions you will see on the exam. They're pretty long, but here's what you really need to know. For each of those 2 weaknesses, you have to complete 3 tasks. Identify the student's need, select and describe an instructional strategy you'd use to help them improve, and finally, explain why your strategy would be effective. Okay, I know that was a lot of explanation. It'll be so much clearer if we put it into action and take a peek at an actual prompt. And stick around, because at the end of this section, I've got something really exciting for you. You'll get a detailed breakdown of our recommended strategy in the study guide. But here's the basic version of what you need to do to complete the CRQ. Study the exhibits, sketch your notes, review what you've written, put your notes into a 5-paragraph outline, write your essay, and quickly check over your work. I'm going to model steps 1 and 2 for you. I'm going to take you inside the 240 STR study guide, where we have full practice prompts for you to respond to. You'll meet Sarah, a 1st grader. We don't have the time to determine both her weaknesses together in this video, but we'll figure out the first one, her foundational weakness, using the first 3 exhibits. Here's Exhibit 1, the word reading assessment. The check shows the words she read correctly. The written transcription shows us which words she missed. They all seem to be sight words that can't be decoded. Exhibit 2, let's play an excerpt from one of the videos we have for you in our guide.
To the other kings.
Here's another error. Sarah said kings for kids. The word kids is not a sight word because it can be decoded. So this seems like an isolated mistake in which she guessed the word instead of sounding it out. It doesn't support the pattern of misused sight words that we've noticed. We'll focus on the sight word errors since there are more of them.
Isn't she cute? She's still struggling with sight words, so it seems like that's going to be our target foundational weakness. Let's look over Exhibit 3 to be sure. Here are the results of Sarah's fluency assessment. We don't get to see the actual words she was given, but we do see the scores. She actually scored above the benchmark on all of these. The teacher notes do mention that she read slowly, but that seems to be appropriate for a first grader. Since there are no glaring weaknesses here, we can mention this data as a strength later in our essay. So we studied our exhibits and determined a weakness. Now it's time to sketch our notes. You can use a table like this to organize your notes. First, record the issue you identified. In Sarah's case, sight words, and write down the most important pieces of evidence from the exhibits that support that weakness. Now we need to identify what we're going to do about Sarah's issue. Let's start with simple and repetitive text with targeted sight words that she missed. We'll put those words on flashcards for extra practice. We'll pace her learning, having her master a few words at a time before introducing new ones. It's a good idea to specify a context for the intervention, like a small group setting. The last part of this sketch is to identify the benefit of your strategy. What's so great about it? Why will it work for Sarah's weaknesses specifically? Well, our strategy is beneficial because it paces the learning, and reading predictable sentences will give her the practice she needs to retain the new words. Look at that, we've got our sketch. So that was a key part of completing the CRQ. But like I mentioned, the videos in the study guide will finish walking you through the rest of the steps to turn that sketch into a finished essay. And that study guide also has tip sections that overview the most common foundational and comprehension weaknesses and the best strategies to address them, and has a section with the blueprint to tackle that tricky effectiveness task like a pro. Okay, by now you figured out I can talk about the CRQ all day long, but we have to move on. The last thing I'll say is this. Remember that awesome thing I said that we would have for you at the end of this section? Here it is. Don't you wish you could write a practice essay and just send it to me to get feedback? Well, you can. Our STR study guide includes the option to get your practice CRQ professionally graded by a member of our team. We'll give you a detailed score and personalized comments to help you improve. All right, let's get into selected response domains. We'll start with the one that covers reading development, and then we'll finish out with reading pedagogy. Something that is true across domains is that this test about teaching reading will require you to do a lot of reading. Don't be surprised to see scenarios and even multi-paragraph within multiple questions linked to them. Even the questions without passages will require more reading than you may expect for a selected response portion of the exam. But before we dive into the questions, we have to know the content they cover. Let's talk about domain 2. In simple terms, reading development foundational skills covers learning to read, while reading development comprehension covers reading to learn. Remember the two types of weaknesses in the CRQ? Same thing here. Let's just say that learning to read is pretty important on a test about teaching reading. Plus, it's worth the biggest chunk of your exam at a whopping 43%. So let's dive into foundational skills. Did you know that talking is related to reading? You'll need to know about oral language, which consists of the skills students need to speak and listen effectively. You'll also need to demonstrate knowledge of literacy instruction for English language learners on the STR. So let's put those two together and discuss strategies for oral language instruction for ELLs. Here are some different methods to use to help ELLs practice their oral language skills. Think, pair, share. When two students think independently, discuss their thoughts with a partner, and then share them with the class. Dialogue, which is simply an exchange of back and forth communication between two or more people. And drill, which is a verbatim oral repetition of words and phrases. You'll likely get a question about the alphabetic principle. The alphabetic principle is the understanding that speech sounds, or phonemes, are represented by graphemes, which are made of letters. This understanding is the basis for phonics instruction. At this level, the strategies you use to teach letters and sounds are often the same ones you use to assess them. For example, you can have students form letters using Play-Doh or trace them in sand, rice, or shaving cream. I know that sounds messy, right? But it works, and your students are going to get messy no matter what you do. And make sure students are saying the letter name or sound while they're forming it. Another big term you need to know is phonological awareness. It's not the same as phonics, but we'll get to that in a minute. Phonological awareness is the umbrella term that includes the ability to hear individual words, syllables, and sounds in spoken language. It involves the understanding that words can be broken into parts. A great strategy to teach several phonological awareness skills is Elkonin boxes, or sound boxes. For syllable awareness, students can move a token for each syllable they hear in a word. For the word caterpillar, students should move 4 tokens up to represent the 4 syllables in cat, pillar. And again, the same strategy could be used to assess the student. Just observe them doing it independently. Okay, now we're ready to talk about phonics. While phonological awareness was about hearing sounds, phonics is all about connecting those sounds, or phonemes, to their written symbols, or graphemes. These phonics skills are important because they're used to decode words when reading and to encode words when writing. And it's critical that teachers monitor phonics skills in order to identify and target student gaps. Common ways to monitor phonics skills include administering running records or word lists. Teachers note the students' errors and can identify words with certain features on which they need further instruction. We're finished with Domain 2. I'm so proud of you. The next domain we'll look at is Reading Development Comprehension, which covers vocabulary and comprehension of literary and informational text. Let's get into it. For vocabulary, you'll probably see a question about the 3 tiers of vocabulary words. Tier 1 consists of basic vocabulary, meaning common words that are already familiar to students when they enter school, such as ball, shoe, or stop. These words do not need to be taught in a classroom setting. Tier 2 is made up of high-frequency academic words, or words that students will encounter frequently in multiple content areas. Many of these are process words that commonly appear in assessments, like describe, explain, or evaluate. Tier 3 consists of low-frequency, domain-specific words. These are academic words that are specific to a particular content area or discipline. These are words that would appear in a subject-specific textbook or in the glossary of an informational text. A few examples of Tier 3 words would be photosynthesis, square root, or economy. For these questions, be ready to identify a word or set of words that fall into each category. Here's a word you're bound to see come up on the test: metacognition. Metacognition basically means thinking about one's own thinking. So I'm understanding what I'm understanding while I'm understanding it. Do you understand? Metacognition is commonly associated with ensuring students are actively engaged while reading. They are making connections and monitoring their comprehension of the content. It's a good idea to review some strategies for facilitating metacognition. A good one is annotation. Teach students to annotate, which means recording their thoughts during reading in the margin of the text. You'll definitely need to use gradual release for annotation. Model doing it first, then have partners do it together, and then finally, let students try to do it on their own. Give students one aspect of the text to comment on at a time, so they're not overwhelmed. I suggest making it fun by letting students use special colored pens or sticky notes to make their annotations. That's it, you finished another domain. Just one more to go. Now, last but certainly not least, let's talk about the reading pedagogy domain. It has 2 competencies tucked underneath it. One about foundations of the science of teaching reading, and one about reading assessment. Part of understanding the foundations of the science of teaching reading is being knowledgeable about reading difficulties. Despite receiving appropriate instruction, some students struggle with reading. Decoding related difficulties and disabilities represent the most common source of reading difficulty. One of the more common decoding-related learning disorders is dyslexia. Dyslexia is the learning disorder that can affect a student's ability to read, spell, write, and speak. Students identified having dyslexia typically experience some or all of the following characteristics: difficulty with phonological awareness, including phonemic awareness, difficulty reading words in isolation, difficulty decoding unfamiliar words, slow, inaccurate, or labored without porosity, oral reading, difficulty spelling, limited reading fluency. However, it's important to know that not every student who exhibits these characteristics has dyslexia. Okay, let's focus on assessment. There's a lot to know about assessing all of the literacy skills that are covered on the STR and what to do with those assessment results. Here's a quick tip. The assessment should always align with the objective. Some of the assessments described in the answer choices might sound like really good ones, but remember that they must match up with the specific skill asked about in the question prompt. You'll also need to know about communicating assessment results with families to promote students' literacy development. Remember that data is important, but it should be explained in a way that helps families understand it and supported by classroom observations. Handing off a paper with a bunch of numbers on it will not cut it. It's also important to ask families to share their own observations about reading and writing at home. This helps support effective two-way collaboration. And if you want study materials and practice questions for each of these concepts, because you need to know them really well, use the 240 study guide. It'll save you a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of worry. Teachers have so much on their plate. Don't make yourself worry about the test. Use 240 to guarantee you pass. We're so confident in our guides that we offer a money-back guarantee. You did it. You reviewed all 4 domains. But don't leave yet. I've got some practice questions you don't want to miss. Now that we've gone over some of the big concepts from our domains, let's look at some practice questions to show you how those concepts can appear on the test. If you want a lot of practice questions, you can click the free practice test below. And at the end, you'll get a score report of how well you did on that test. Now for questions. I've already showed you a sample prompt for a constructed response question at the beginning of the video. So let's look at some selected response questions, starting with Domain 2, Foundational Skills. Mrs. Morgan has been working to teach her kindergarten students alphabetic principles. Monday, she began by describing the sound made by the letter S. Which of the following would be the most logical next step of instruction? Describe the sounds made by the rest of the letters in the alphabet. Point out examples of S in familiar words and names. Read a book where many words start with the letter S and ask students to tally how many times they hear it. Have all students write a list of words that start with the letter S. This is the right answer. An opportunity for practice to reinforce the relationship between newly learned letter and sound pairs would be an effective next step of instruction. Let's look at another one. This is a phonics question. A 3rd grade teacher is assessing a student's phonics skills. She has noticed the student is able to read familiar words with ease, but is often stumped by new words, even if they would be considered easily decodable. Which of the following assessments would be the most useful for the teacher to determine how best to support this student? A nonsense words test is the best option in this case because the student specifically struggles with new words, regardless of whether they are easily decodable. This suggests that she may depend on memorization more than decoding skills. The teacher should consider the phonics skills represented in the nonsense words test to plan which skill she needs to cover with the student. For example, if the student missed the nonsense words Kyle or hape, the student would benefit from instruction on CVCE words. Okay, one more from Domain 2. A 1st grade teacher wants to work with her students on increasing their phonological awareness abilities. Which activity would best achieve this goal? Providing students with a starting word and having them create as many new words as possible by switching letters, modeling how to break words down into smaller parts, selecting students at random to read orally from a text, asking students to finish a sentence or phrase with a rhyme. Now, at first I thought this was the correct answer, but the 240 quiz feedback feature tells me that breaking written words down into their parts would increase the student's morphological awareness. So this is the correct answer. Choosing an appropriate rhyming word would develop a student's phonological awareness because they have to hear the sounds of the original word and then choose another word with similar sounds. Now, let's take a look at some questions from Domain 3, Comprehension. Which of the following techniques below is most beneficial for helping students develop metacognitive reading habits, making connections between the text and the reader, the world, and other text, identifying unknown vocabulary words while reading and logging them into a vocabulary journal, writing summaries of each paragraph to refer to when analyzing the text, reading a text silently, and then reading it aloud? This is the right choice. The ability to make text to self, text to world, or text to text connections is a component of metacognition. Students need instruction, modeling, and opportunities to practice with this metacognitive technique. Let's check out a question about those 3 vocabulary tiers. A 4th grade teacher reads a book to her students with the vocabulary word scarce. Which tier does this vocabulary word fit into? Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, or Tier 4? This is the answer. Tier 2 words are high-frequency, multiple-meaning words. These words are used in mature conversations and directly help and influence speaking and reading. Scarce is a Tier 2 vocabulary word for a 4th grade student. Now, for the reading pedagogy domain. Systematic and explicit reading instruction is necessary because reading skills are scaffolded, building in complexity, and rely on mastery of earlier skills. Instruction should be systematic. That means there's a plan that works through a purposeful order. And explicit, that means direct, to help ensure that students gain the knowledge required to support more advanced learning goals. Let's do one more. If a teacher is using assessment to guide classroom instruction, which of the following assessments would not be useful? An entry-level assessment, an ongoing curriculum-based assessment, an informal assessment, or a summative assessment? Our correct choice here is summative assessment. These occur at the end of instruction and would not be beneficial in guiding current instruction. Now, that is just a small sliver of practice questions to give you an idea of how these concepts are assessed on a test. There is still plenty more to learn. Did you know that thousands of teachers have passed their certification exams using our study guides? If you really want to make sure you're prepared for the TExES Science of Teaching Reading, take the next step and subscribe to the 240 Study Guide. It is hours of videos, so you can watch or listen while you're living your life. It is test-aligned with hundreds of practice questions, so you know precisely what you need to study. And it has a money-back guarantee. So click the link below right now to get started.